Having fallen into a very serious frame of mind, in which mutual expressions of kindness passed between us, such as would be thought too vain in me to repeat, I talked with regret of the sad, inevitable certainty that one of us must survive the other. Johnson said, "Sir, yes, that is an affecting consideration. I remember Swift in one of his letters to Pope says, 'I intend to come over that we may meet once more, and when we must part it is what happens to all human beings.'" I said, "The hope that we shall see our departed friends again must support the mind." Johnson said, "Why, yes, sir." I said, "There is a strange unwillingness to part with life independent of serious fears as to futurity. A reverend friend of ours, says here Dr. Blair, in a footnote, tells me that he feels an uneasiness at the thought of leaving his house, his study, and his books." Johnson said, "This is foolish in him. A man need not be uneasy on these grounds, for, as he will retain his consciousness, he may say with the philosopher, 'Omnia mea mecum porto,' all that is mine I carry with me," to quote Cicero. "But still there is something painful in..." I'm sorry. And then I said, "True, sir, we may carry our books in our heads, but still there is something painful in the thought of leaving forever what has given us pleasure. I remember many years ago, when my imagination was warm, and I happened to be in a melancholy mood, it distressed me to think of going into a state of being in which Shakespeare's poetry did not exist. A lady whom I then much admired, a very amiable woman, humored my fancy and relieved me by saying, 'The first thing you will meet in the other world will be an elegant copy of Shakespeare's works presented to you.' Dr. Johnson smiled benignantly at this and did not appear to disapprove of the notion. Of course, maybe they'll just meet Shakespeare in the afterlife as well, right? We went to St. Clement's Church again in the afternoon, and then returned and drank tea and coffee in Mrs. Williams' room. Mrs. Desmoulins doing the honors of the tea table. I observed that he would not even look at a proof sheet of his Life of Waller on Good Friday. I thought it was Easter. Oh, no, it's Good Friday still. Friday, 17th April, 1778, it says here. Mr. Allen, the printer, brought a book on agriculture, which was printed and was soon to be published. It was a very strange performance. The author, it says here in a footnote, the author was William Marshall, having mixed in it his own thoughts upon various topics, along with his remarks on plowing, sowing, and other farming operations. He seemed to be an absurd, profane fellow, and had introduced in his book many sneers at religion with equal ignorance and conceit. Dr. Johnson permitted me to read some passages aloud. One was that he resolved to work on Sunday and did work, but he owned he felt some weak compunction. And he had this very curious reflection: "I was born in the wilds of Christianity, and the briars and thorns still hang about me." Dr. Johnson could not help laughing at this ridiculous image, yet was very angry at the fellow's impiety. "However," said Johnson, "the reviewers will make him hang himself." He, however, observed that formerly there might have been a dispensation obtained for working on Sunday in the time of harvest. Indeed, in ritual observances, were all the ministers of religion what they should be, and what many of them are, such a power might be wisely and safely lodged with the church. On Saturday, April 14th, actually the 18th, Boswell made a boo-boo, I drank tea with him. He praised the late Mr. Duncombe. It says here in a footnote, this is William Duncombe, Esquire. He married the sister of John Hughes, the poet, not the director of, what's that movie? Oh, shoot, I can't think of it now. Pretty in Pink and whatnot. Was the author of two tragedies and other ingenious productions, and died 26 February 1769 at age 79. Anyway, he was praising him of Canterbury as a pleasing man. He used to come to me. I did not seek much after him. Indeed, I never sought much after anybody. I said, Lord Orrery, I suppose. Johnson said, No, sir, I never went to him, but when he sent for me. I said, Richardson? Johnson said, Yes, sir, but I sought after George Palomensar the most. I used to go and sit with him at an alehouse in the city. I am happy to mention another instance when I discovered of his seeking after a man of merit. Soon after the Honorable Daines Barrington had published his excellent observations on the statutes, Johnson waited on that worthy and learned gentleman, and having told him his name, courteously said, I have read your book, sir, with great pleasure, and wish to be better known to you. Thus began an acquaintance which was continued with mutual regard as long as Johnson lived. Talking of a recent seditious delinquent, it says here that's Horntook in a footnote. Johnson said, They should set him in the pillory, that he may be punished in a way that would disgrace him. I observe that the pillory does not always disgrace. And I mentioned an instance of a gentleman. It says here this gentleman is John Shabir, who I thought was not dishonored by it. Johnson said, Aye, but he was, sir. He could not mouth and strut as he used to do after having been there. People are not very willing to ask a man to their tables who has stood in the pillory. The gentleman who had dined with us at Dr. Percys, Langton. I wish they would just have, like, in brackets next to this, the person they're talking about, so I don't have to go down these footnotes. Maybe I'll write a letter to the, tell them to do that. Anyway, the gentleman who had dined with us at Dr. Percy's, who was Langton, came in. Johnson attacked the Americans with impertinent vehemence of abuse. I said something in their favor and added that I was always sorry when he talked on that subject. This, it seemed, exasperated him, though he said nothing at the time. The cloud was charged with sulphurous vapor, which was afterwards to burst in thunder. We talked of a gentleman. Oh, I'm sorry. That gentleman before was not Langton. It was the Reverend Norton Nichols. Now they're talking about Langton. It makes sense because Langton, I think, is kind of a homebody these days. We talked of a gentleman who was running out his fortune in London, and I said, we must get him out of it. All his friends must quarrel with him, and then that will soon drive him away. Have a little intervention. That's what they're suggesting. Johnson said, Nay, sir, we'll send you to him. If your company does not drive a man out of his house, nothing will. Oh, burn. This was a horrible shock, for which there was no visible cause, except for he was standing up for Americans. I afterwards asked him why he had said so harsh a thing. Johnson said, Because, sir, you made me angry about the Americans. See, I'm right. I said, But why did you not take your revenge directly? Johnson, smiling, said, Because, sir, I had nothing ready. A man cannot strike till he has his weapons. This was a candid and pleasant confession. He showed me tonight his drawing room, very genteelly fitted up, and said, Mrs. Thrale sneered when I talked of my having asked you and your lady to live in my house. I was obliged to tell her that you would be in a respectable situation in my house as in hers. Sir, the insolence of wealth will creep out. I said, She has a little both of the insolence of wealth and the conceit of parts. Johnson said, The insolence of wealth is a wretched thing, but the conceit of parts has some foundation. To be sure it should not be, but who is without it? I said, Yourself, sir. Johnson said, Why, I play no tricks, I lay no traps. I said, No, sir, you are 6 feet high, and you only do not stoop. We talked of the numbers of people that sometimes have composed the household of great families. I mentioned that there was 100 in the family of the present Earl of Englandtone's father. Dr. Johnson seeming to doubt it, I began to enumerate. Let us see, my lord and my lady too. Johnson said, Nay, sir, if you are to count by twos, you may be long enough. I said, well, but now I add 2 sons and 7 daughters, and a servant for each. That will make 20. So we have the 5th part already. Johnson said, very true. You get to 20 pretty readily, but you will not so easily get further on. We grow to 5 feet pretty readily, but it is not so easy to grow to 7. A little bit lost in that part. The jokes over my head. On Sunday, April 19th, being Easter Day, after the solemnities of this festival of St. Paul's Church, I visited him, but could not stay to dinner. I expressed a wish to have the arguments for Christianity always in readiness, that my religious faith might be as firm and clear as any proposition whatever, so that I need not be under the least uneasiness when it should be attacked. Johnson said, sir, you cannot answer all objections. You have demonstration from a first cause. You see he must be good as well as powerful, because there is nothing to make him otherwise, and goodness of itself is preferable. Yet you have against this what is very certain, the unhappiness of human life. This, however, gives us reason to hope for a future state of compensation, that there may be a perfect system. But of that we are not sure till we have a positive revelation. I told him that his Rasillus had often made me unhappy. Oh, they were just reading that in, I'm reading Jane Eyre right now, and just the other day, I'm at the beginning of it, this character is, it's like kind of nerdy character is reading that book. That's funny. I knew it sounded familiar. Anyway, I told him that his Rasillus had often made me unhappy, for it represented the misery of human life so well and so convincingly to a thinking mind that if at any time the impression wore off, and I felt myself uneasy, I began to suspect some delusion. Depressing people, these guys. Sad. On Monday, April 20th, 420, I found him at home in the morning. We talked of a gentleman, says your Langton again, who we apprehended was gradually involving his circumstances by bad management. Johnson said, wasting of fortune is evaporation by 1,000 imperceptible means. If it were a stream, they'd stop it. You must speak to him. It is really miserable. Were he a gamester, it would be said he had hopes of winning. Were he a bankrupt in trade, he might have grown rich. But he has neither spirit to spend nor resolution to spare. He does not spend fast enough to have pleasure from it. He has the crime of prodigality and the wretchedness of parsimony. If a man is killed in a duel, he is killed as many as one has been killed. He is killed as many a one has been killed. But it is a sad thing for a man to lie down and die, to bleed to death, because he has no fortitude enough to sear the wound or even to stitch it up. I cannot pause a moment to admire the fecundity of fancy and choice of language, which in this instance, and indeed on almost all occasions, Johnson displayed. It was well observed by Dr. Percy, now Bishop of Dromore. The conversation of Johnson is strong and clear, and may be compared to an antique statue, where every vein and muscle is distinct and bold. Ordinary conversation resembles an inferior caste. On Saturday, April 25th, I dined with him at Sir Joshua Reynolds's, with the learned Dr. Musgrave, Councillor Leland of Ireland, son to the historian Mrs. Cholmondeley, and some more ladies. The project, a new poem by Richard Trickle, was read to the company by Dr. Musgrave. Johnson said, sir, it has no power. Were it not for the well-known names with which it is filled, it would be nothing. The names carry the poet, not the poet the names. Musgrave said, a temporary poem always entertains us. Johnson said, so does an account of the criminals hanged yesterday entertain us. He proceeded. Demosthenes Taylor, as he was called, that is, the editor of Demosthenes, was the most silent man, the merest statue of a man that I have ever seen. I once dined in company with him, and all he said during the whole time was no more than Richard. How a man should say only Richard, it is not easy to imagine, but it was thus. Dr. Douglas was talking of Dr. Zachary Gray and ascribing to him something that was written by Dr. Richard Gray. So to correct him, Taylor said, imitating his affected, substantious emphasis and nod, Richard. Mrs. Cholmondeley, a weird last name, in a high flow of spirits, exhibited some lively sallies of hyperbolical compliments of Johnson, with whom she had been long acquainted, and was very easy. He was quick in catching the manner of the moment, and answered her somewhat in the style of the hero of a romance. Madame, you crown me with unfading laurels. I happened, I know not how, to say that a pamphlet meant a prose piece. Johnson said, No, sir, a few sheets of poetry and bound are a pamphlet, as much as a few sheets of prose. Footnote here. Dr. Johnson is supported by the usage of preceding writers. So in Musarium Delicae, 8 volume, 1656, the writer is speaking of Suckling's play entitled Allegora, printed in folio. We have, This great voluminous pamphlet may be said to be like one that hath more hair than head. Musgrave said, A pamphlet may be understood to mean a poetical piece in Westminster Hall, that is a informal language, but in common language it is understood to mean prose. Johnson said, and here was one of the many instances of his knowing clearly and telling exactly how a thing is. A pamphlet is understood in common language to mean prose, only from this that there is so much more prose written than poetry. As when we say a book, prose is understood for the same reason, though a book may as well be in poetry as in prose. We understand what is most general, and we name what is less frequent. We talked of a lady, it says here, Lady Lucan and her daughter. Her verses on Ireland. Miss Reynolds said, Have you seen them, sir? Johnson said, No, madame, I have seen a translation from Horace by one of her daughters. She showed it to me. Miss Reynolds asked, And how was it, sir? Johnson said, Why, very well for young Miss's verses, that is to say, compared with excellence, nothing, but very well for the person who wrote them. I am vexed at being shown verses in that manner. Miss Reynolds said, But if they should be good, why not give them hearty praise? Johnson said, Why, madame, because I have not then got the better of my bad humor from having been shown them. You must consider, madame, beforehand they may be bad as well as good. Nobody has a right to put another under such a difficulty that he must either hurt the person by telling the truth or hurt himself by telling what is not true. I said, A man often shows his writing to people of eminence to obtain from them, either from their good nature or from them not being able to tell the truth firmly, a commendation of which he may afterwards avail himself. Johnson said, Very true, sir. Therefore, a man who is asked by an author what he thinks of his work is put to the torture and is not obliged to speak the truth, so that what he says is not considered as his opinion. Yet he has said it and cannot retract it. And this author, when mankind are hunting him with a canister at his tail, can say, I would not have published had not Johnson or Reynolds or Musgrave or some other good judge commended the work. Yet I consider it as a very difficult question in conscience whether one should advise a man not to publish a work if profit be at his object. For the man may say, Had it not been for you, I should have had the money. Now you cannot be sure, for you have only your own opinion, and the public may think very differently. Sir Joshua Reynolds said, You must upon such an occasion have two judgments, one as to the real value of the work, the other as to what may please the general taste at the time. Johnson said, But you can be sure of neither, and therefore I should scruple much to give a suppressive vote. Both Goldsmith's comedies were once refused, his first by Garrick, his second by Colman, who was prevailed on at last by much solicitation, nay, a kind of force to bring it on. His Vicar of Wakefield I myself did not think would have had much success. It was written and sold to a bookseller before his Traveller, but published after, so little expectation had the bookseller from it. Had it been sold after the Traveller, he might have had twice as much money for it, though 60 guineas was no mean price. The bookseller had the advantage of Goldsmith's reputation from the Traveller in the sale, though Goldsmith had it not in selling the copy. Sir Joshua Reynolds said, "The Beggar's Opera affords a proof how strangely people will differ in opinion about a literary performance. Burke thinks it has no merit." Johnson said, "It was refused by one of the houses, but I should have thought it would succeed, not from any great excellence in the writing, but from the novelty and the general spirit and gaiety of the piece, which keeps the audience always attentive and dismisses them in good humor." And I will dismiss you in good humor right now. Till next time, bye from Boswell.